Hello and welcome to the PowerPoint that will take you through some revision notes for your manufacturing question for the exam. So of course the objectives for this part of the video are to help you guide your revision activities. Now obviously with a question like this you could revise for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and still not pinpoint the information you're going to need for the actual question, because they can ask you to manufacture anything in the exam. So the idea of this video is just to give you the pointers to focus your activities, so when you're revising you can spend a sensible amount of time on the things that are actually going to help you in the exam rather than trying to do everything. Okay, so also you focus on the manufacturing question. Note that again, as with the other videos, the exam board can change the structure of the manufacturing question at any point. So whilst the information they're going to be trying to draw out of you is going to be the same, the way in which the question is presented may be slightly different. So the key thing in that situation is to not panic, read the question carefully and make sure you understand what's being asked of you so you can provide the correct information, because I know that with a question like this you're all going to be absolutely fine if you're nice and calm and cool and collected in your approach. So the manufacturing question itself, as I said, it's not a trick. All you need to do is look carefully at the product that you're being asked to manufacture, and then use your skills, your experience, and your common sense to explain how your item would be manufactured. Okay. Now, I have not seen a single question that provides a product that any of you would struggle manufacturing in the school workshop. You're all capable of producing all of the products that have been given so far in the past papers. So just think carefully. If you were in a school workshop and you had a couple of hours, how would you manufacture this product? And 99.99% of the time you're going to be absolutely correct. You're only going to get this wrong if you start to panic and not read the question properly. Okay. One little tricky point to consider is this thing here. Now, sometimes with the manufacturing question, the exam board will ask you to produce a single item. Sometimes they'll ask you to produce a batch. So for example, a batch of 10. Now in that case, they're asking for you really to be explaining how you would use jigs and formers and templates to make sure that your batch of 10 look identical. Okay, so there are lots of examples of coursework pieces this year that uses batches. So for example, Hiba, with your table, you've produced a batch of, we'll call them fish shapes. I know they're not fish shapes, but just so we all understand what they are, and there are lots of those, they all need to be identical. So you produced a batch. Okay, other ones, so single, in this case, Grace, your table is a single one-off item, so you just have to explain how you would manufacture your product. Okay, so don't panic, be sensible, and think how you would manufacture it and you will be right. Okay, so examples of the kind of things that have appeared in the past. They're not the most inspiring products, I must admit, that appear on the paper, but they do show that you're able to explain your manufacturing skills in enough detail to warrant high marks. Okay, an example could be pencil pot or a toilet roll holder. Okay, so again, everybody in the workshop will be able to manufacture one of these items. Okay, so the manufacturing question itself, it's some tips for you. So it's really important to read the question and underline the important details. So for example, quantity. If you're asked for a batch of 10 items and you only explain how to produce one, you're limiting yourself to half marks maximum for the question. Okay, so if they ask you for a batch, explain how you would produce in a batch using words like jigs, formers, and templates. Okay, what the exam board is looking for here is sufficient detail so that somebody else can make the product based on the instructions that you give them. So imagine you're producing a set of instructions for a Year 7 student, and then you should provide enough detail, I would imagine, to gain full marks. Think carefully about the materials you're going to use and make sure the processes that you use are appropriate for the materials. So for example, if you wanted to make your object out of aluminium, you couldn't laser cut it, okay, because you can't laser cut through aluminium. Think carefully about the tools and equipment and identify the tools and equipment given the correct names so the exam board can give you marks for that. Okay. So when you get to the question, there's a chance that you will be asked to produce the item and you will be given the option of producing in the traditional way or the modern CAD/CAM way. Okay. Now in both of those cases, there needs to be sufficient detail for third-party manufacture, but also with a traditional method, there are many more points at which you can gain marks. So the CAD/CAM, where the machine's cutting out the object for you, there is a potential there to provide less detail in your written question. So if you're going to answer it in a CAD-CAM way, which is great, and I definitely wouldn't want to push you away from that, you just need to make sure that you include all of the detail, and I'll cover that in just a second. Okay, so traditional ways. If you're thinking about traditional cutting and shaping materials, you're probably going to go with a wood or a plastic product, I would imagine, in the exam. So using things like tri-squares and steel rules, using guides on the bandsaws, naming any power tools you're using, such as the power sanders. When you come to glue objects together, talk about clamping dry, and then talk about the clamps that you would use, so the quick release clamps or the G clamps or the sash clamps. Talk about using templates to draw around and cut shapes, and talk about using jigs. So if you've glued your object together with jigs in the past, then explain how you've done that. Okay, with the CAD-CAM, because we're looking for a similar volume of information as the traditional way of manufacturing, the exam board is going to look for finite detail here. So they're going to want to know, if you're designing on a computer, what hardware are you using, what software are you using, and if you're defining cutting and scoring lines, what coloured lines are you using? Label those coloured lines. You need to identify the drawing tools that you're using, such as the straight line tool, or the circle tool, or the square tool. Then you need to talk about how you transfer your files from your computer to the laser cutter computer. So take the stuff on a memory stick or save to a shared area, for example. Then you need to talk about sending the job from the laser cutter computer to the laser cutter. So explaining about material thicknesses, material settings, and turning the extractor on. Now, while those things might seem a little bit silly to have to put into an exam question, remember that this is for detail for third-party manufacturer. So if you were given this to a year 7, they wouldn't know to change the power or material settings or turn the extractor on unless you told them to do so. So it really is about detail. Let's take a look at a past question. So in this question, it was for a lamp. So you can see from the drawing that it's a wooden lamp because it's got some grain. This is stem, you've got a switch, and you've got a base. Okay, and then obviously the light pet just comes here. It's clear to me from the drawing that there's one base and one stem, and they're joined somehow at this point. It's also clear to me that it's not MDF because I can see grain. Okay, so plywood would be okay because plywood does have grain because it's birch faced. But it's also clear to me that this looks far too thick to be laser cut. Okay, now you could laser cut several layers and glue them together, and that would be okay, but I would avoid just laser cutting one thick piece of oak, for example, because you wouldn't be able to laser cut that. Okay, so use your common sense in this kind of scenario. If you move down, the question is divided into sections. Now in this year, the first one was marking out, the second one was cutting, the third one was joining together, and then the final was finishing. Okay, so marking out in CAD or traditional. So you put down here things like for the traditional, you'd use things like using compasses or using a template, using a pencil, sharp pencil. With the computer-aided design side, you'd probably draw a picture of the screen. You'd label it with 2D design and compute all the computer hardware, and you'd label the red lines and the blue lines for cutting and shaping. And you'd explain at this point that you were going to cut out 3 or 4 bases so you got the thickness you needed. Okay, later on. For the cutting and shaping, obviously for the cutting and shaping of traditional, you'd probably use a bandsaw. So in this case, you'd have to freestyle it. Obviously you'd have a template first of all to draw around, but then you'd be able to freestyle it on the bandsaw, cutting around the template. And on this one, you might be able to use the guides on the bandsaw or the mitre guide so that you get the right angles. For computer-aided manufacture, you'd have to talk about taking your design from your computer to the laser cutter computer, setting the job up and making sure that shape tessellated to reduce material wastage, and then send the job to the laser cutter, changing the material thicknesses and power settings, and then you talk about making sure the material is placed in the laser cutter at the top left hand corner and that the extract unit was on. Okay. The next one is joining the objects together. This will probably be the same whether it was CAD, CAM or traditional. So you'd obviously use some kind of glue here. Now because it's wood to wood, you'd probably suggest a PVA. You may want to even draw a mortise and tenon on the bottom or some dowels or add some screws in at this point to make it slightly stronger, remembering of course that a butt joint can be quite weak. You'd clamp dry and then you would apply your glue and then reapply the clamps afterwards. Okay. So the question itself, not particularly difficult. I mean, this product is far simpler than any products you guys have produced for your GCSE coursework, as are these ones, far simpler. So there's no question that you're able to produce them. It's just about being cool, calm and collected and making sure that you read the question well enough. Okay guys, well done.